Good morning, everyone. This is Will Sager with the Southeast Recycling Development Council. I want to welcome you to our July webinar, What Communities Need to Do to Keep Recycling as an Essential Service. We've got some very good speakers lined up today. Michael McPherson from the Georgia Municipal Association, Kevin Leonard from the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners, and Lisa Skumatz from Skumatz Economic Research Associates. We want to look at the struggle that we're facing as a result of COVID and its economic impact and what that's going to do to our municipalities and our counties, and how we can work to find the best ways to keep recycling involved. I want to, as we go into the webinar, you will have the opportunity to present questions. You, as attendees, you are muted through this whole event. But you do have a question box in your control bar there, and those questions will be compiled by Jen Dabbs, who is driving this webinar for CERTIC, and we'll cover those after all the speakers. Just a little bit, CERTIC is a broad range of entities. Our mission is to unite government and industry to bring together sustainable recycling. The longer mission is there. These slides will be shared with you along with the recording of this webinar next week. But CERTIC is made up of a broad range of organizations, and these are the sponsor organizations that make these efforts, our work, available for you today. Just to kind of frame our discussion here, we cite Dr. Hefner's work, and we've done some economic studies with Dr. Hefner at College of Charleston. But and I take this from him, but that recycling is beneficial for the environment is probably an uncontested proposition. But what is becoming increasingly more obvious is that recycling contributes to the economic health of the state's economy. Our work in CERTIC has been to identify the demand for material in the CERTIC region of the 11 states of the Southeast. And in that, we have got that, and it's up on certic.org/maps. You can get to this interactive tool and see those facilities that are reliant upon the material coming out of our recycling programs for their manufacturing feedstock. And it has quite an impact in the region. We've identified 362 plants employing 97, right at 98,000 people, and putting out $43 billion in sales every year. We add to that ISRI's work, where they've looked at the recycling industry. And that's a little bit different because those are the entities, the MRFs, the processors, and those people involved in recycling to get the material to manufacturing. I won't present that there's no overlap between these numbers, but a lot of these are unique jobs and unique wages and taxes that are generated from this economic there. So it is important as we look how we adapt to COVID and COVID's impacts on our economy, and how we start looking at how we recover and come out of this. We're going to need the feedstock for all of these jobs in order to have that section of our economy carrying forward. So to cover that today, I will moderate, but the core of this work is really with our presenters, Michael, Kevin, and Lisa. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Will. Good morning. Let me get my screen set up. There we go. Can everyone see my slide here?
It's good to me.
All right. So I'm Michael McPherson with the Georgia Municipal Association. And over the past 14 years, I've been at the Georgia General Assembly supporting local government efforts in different ways. For the past 8 years, I've been with the Municipal Association, and I have focused on revenue and finance issues, community development issues, and environment and natural resources issues. So today I want to give you kind of an overview and start off with the budgets of the different southeastern states. And what we see before you here is taken from a document that was published June 30th by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. If you look at the fiscal year 2020 on the left and fiscal year 2021 on the right, you'll notice differences in impact because the impact started in one fiscal year and will carry over into the next. Now, some states have been able to use CARES Act funding to plug holes in their budgets, while others may do that sooner or later. So this is a moving target. All of the income streams at the state level have not, the impacts haven't been fully seen yet. So with income tax deferrals and processing of sales tax and other types of taxes that come through a state's revenue department may or may not be counted yet. So these are all moving targets as we go forward. You do not see Alabama, Texas, Florida, or Georgia in the list. I'm not sure, what the reasons there, were for them not counting. And Florida is in the middle of their budget conference right now, so they are in the process of figuring out their budget. Texas has called for 5% cuts across the board for their departments, and Alabama saw declines as well in April and May, but they were able to plug some of the holes in their budget with CARES Act funding. So I've heard. Now, Georgia, we expected, and the departments were told to prepare for a 14% cut for fiscal year 2021, and it turned out as they started to see the numbers come in, that wasn't necessary. It was only a 10% cut reflective in the budget that they passed. And there were a couple things that played in favor of revenue collections. The main piece was House Bill 276, which is our online marketplace facilitator bill. Many of you know that brick and mortar stores have been at a disadvantage in many states for many years because they're having to compete with online retailers that don't pay sales tax. Well, this ensured in Georgia that those third parties were paying sales tax or were charging sales tax to be remitted to the state and its local governments. So that brought in more than what was expected in April and May, and so it was able to create a good buffer there. It was a huge victory for cities and counties of the state, as Georgia has local sales tax where many states do not. Another victory in terms of recycling and or monies that can be used for recycling programs was Senate Bill 123, which deals with solid waste host fees at the county level and the solid waste trust fund fees and the hazardous waste trust fund fees. Those dollars can all be used in various ways to support recycling programs. So it was a good session, even though it was interrupted by the pandemic. So the heaviest hit municipal revenue areas were certainly tourism, entertainment, and travel. We don't get a share of sales tax in Georgia, and the local governments in Georgia are not allowed to impose an income tax, an income tax. So that income tax effect is going to be purely on the state, and they do not share any income tax with the municipal government. So the impacts are going to be purely in these areas at first. These include convention business, restaurants, music venues, bars, things along those lines. Now, how that translates into actual revenue types, it's sales tax is a big portion of that. Accommodations tax is hotel motel tax is what it's called in Georgia, which is a locally regulated tax that is collected and remitted locally. And then gasoline tax. each of these tax types are going to have a different impact in different states on cities, because they make up a different proportion of city revenues. And when you look at cities as a whole, none of them are the same. And so, of course, if you have a diverse tax base, it provides greater insulation for revenue disruptions. And local governments that are more reliant on state revenue sharing could be hit harder should those state shares see a larger hits. So in other words, a local economy and a local revenue stream or streams can protect itself if it's purely local. So hotel motel taxes were hit across the board, and the things that they support are going to have a hard time. They're going to cities are going to have to bolster the budgets to make sure that the convention visitor bureaus and those types of entities stay afloat. Sales tax, like I mentioned, the online facilitator in Georgia helped with sales tax across the board there, and also in different areas you see different tax bases. So one city may have purely residential and hardly any commercial footprint or retail footprint, where others are varied and have a good mixture. And then there are also cities that only have retail and commercial. So each of these streams will be affected differently based on the footprint the footprint types that bring in those different revenues. So that's the name of the game here. My director likes to say that you may have been to one city and seen one city, but that only means you've seen one city, because none of them are alike. And so service load is different in every city. The quality of life that a city supports could be heavily impacted in this day and time because of either experiencing growth or shrinkage in terms of population. A lot of our rural cities are seeing population declines, and it's hard for a city to see population declines and support the same service load. So recycling may be on the block in communities like that as they try to justify what services their citizens need. Now, the COVID impacts to recycling specifically, there's only one example in our state that I was able to come up with that relates to a city that collects its own recycling that had a change in service delivery based on COVID. They delayed recycling pickup to allow for, I guess, the COVID to dissipate, so that they didn't infect anyone in the process. So that was the only process-based COVID impact that I was able to come up with. But cities in our state usually contract out the service of solid waste and recycling services themselves. Hardly any cities have a solid waste department anymore in Georgia, which may be very different in other states. So what communities need to keep recycling as an essential service? So cities have to see a cost benefit, and it's hard right now because of the rising cost over the past year and a half or so with the materials. And then at the same time, the public must see recycling as essential. So what we can do to ensure that we increase in exposure is to make sure that the industry impacts and the opportunities and the benefits are clearly enunciated to the state government and to the people as a whole. And how do we do that? In Georgia, we formed a coalition the Georgia Recycling Development Partners. And this one pager was put out beginning of the session to support our efforts to use funds that are pegged for recycling programs and information programs around the state, and hopefully to be used as such. But on the first page, we highlight all of the great things that are happening in Georgia commercially with recycling. And then on the second, you see some of our goals and trying to get the state to put money to certain uses. Now, this campaign piece was successful in the passage of Senate Bill 123, which had several bills combined into it. And so we had a multifaceted victory there because the solid waste trust fund fees were held up, and then the solid waste fee per ton was also flexibility was also gained there for counties to use in different ways, and many of those ways allow them to support their recycling programs if they have them. So with that, that's kind of my big overview of the position of the states around the Southeast. And here's my contact information. If anyone has any questions, you can reach out to me later. But yeah, it's a time when cities have to make hard decisions, and some of them, due to the COVID epidemic, have had to choose to do away with their recycling programs. But others that where the demand is great, they have found ways to hold on to their programs. And so as we move into the end of the year and go into fiscal year, or move into 2021, if it doesn't get any better, we're definitely going to have to get creative on how we message the benefits of recycling across the Southeast. And I guess I'll turn it over to Kevin from here.
Thank you very much, Michael. Jen's going to switch the controls over to Kevin so we can get his slides up. There we are. Kevin, it's yours.
Great. Thank you, Will. And thanks everyone who's on the webinar today. I appreciate all that you're doing to serve your communities, your cities and counties across the states in the Southeast. And Will, I just appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. And Michael, thanks for that presentation from Georgia. I was thinking about how long Will and I have known each other, and it's pretty remarkable how time flies by. So it's probably been a decade now since we first were introduced to one another and been working together in the Southeast on these issues. And by the way, Neil Emery, who I know you worked with in Transylvania, sends his best regards to you, Will, from North Carolina.
Thank you very much.
I have the pleasure of working with Neil here at the association now. So I do work with the Association of County Commissioners in North Carolina and have done so for about 11 years now. Started out in their government relations, in the government relations role, and somehow they let me be the executive director. I still pinch myself every day because it's one of the best jobs in the world. So I get to do that. I'm going to emphasize, I'm going to have a more global look at CARES Act funding and budgetary impacts for counties. Some will translate to other states and counties in your areas and other as well. Some will be unique to North Carolina. So I will go back and forth, but I will emphasize what Michael said, that if you've been to one county, you've certainly been to one county. Same for states. And so it's a little bit different everywhere, but there are major themes that have emerged through this. In the slide deck that I have for you today, it's what I call data rich, which is another way to say they're really busy with graphs and numbers. Not your best format for a slide presentation, but my intent was to get this information to you so you can have it to use later, and it just shows the picture of where we are. So I'm going to try to go as quickly as possible and jump right in. If I can get my slides to move. Here we go. This slide's pretty quick up front, just to demonstrate that, in a county in North Carolina, counties do just about everything. When I first started working at the General Assembly in North Carolina, I was amazed, of course, because every bill touched a county in some way. I went from working in the private sector on one particular issues for various clients, and I was like all of a sudden tracking all the bills that are introduced, from public health to county jails to public safety, register of deeds, libraries, everything, and of course solid waste and recycling as well. So every aspect of what's on your screen in front of you has been touched and will be touched by the pandemic because of either funding issues or direct line services. Counties as cities are on the front lines of the pandemic with first responders, DSS in North Carolina, public health, all types of things. And the ramifications of the pandemic, I think, are going to reverberate for years and generations to come, and showing up in places you never thought it would because of just how far-reaching it is. I'm going to focus now on the CARES Act and the national legislation that passed, the $3 trillion piece of legislation, and talk about that, and specifically at the North Carolina level. And it will tell the story for other states as well. But in North Carolina, the CARES Act funding came down, and it was at $4 billion for North Carolina. There's a slide a little bit later that shows the actual appropriations for all of the states in the union, and you can look out the ones in the Southeast. It's important to note that the CARES Act allocated funding for the most populous areas, so 500,000 in population and above. There were direct appropriations to those entities. In North Carolina, we had 4 of those types of units of government. It was Wake County, Guilford County, the County of Mecklenburg, and the City of Charlotte. All the others, and in this slide, you see the number 97. 97 talks about counties only. So there were 3 counties that received direct appropriations, 97 did not. So the way Congress decided to handle that was distribution through the states to give this tranche of money, this $4 billion for the states to use for recovery or for basic reimbursement on the pandemic, and also distribute that monies to the local governments. And that became, but didn't give any direction as to how to do it. And therefore, that's become a little bit more complex and political and has created a lot of policy questions, which I'll dig into a little bit further here. In the state of North Carolina, the General Assembly decided to divvy up that money for locals, and they set aside $150 million for local governments for appropriations. And in their first bill that they passed, they gave it to counties only, left it up to the counties to decide how to give those to the municipalities. And then they put $150 million over basically in a savings account, so that and they're waiting on Congress to basically give flexibility for those funds. It's very restrictive. It can only be for non-budgeted COVID-related issues in your county budget. It has to be used by December the 31st, so it's time limited, and it cannot be used on revenue replacement, and that's significant. And so they put that $150 million to the side, waiting for Congress to act to basically say, we're going to give you more flexibility to use that for revenue replacement, because that's going to be a really big problem in the future. And I'll get into that in just a second. Okay, here's one of those data-rich slides I'm talking about, but later, if you have an opportunity to look at this, it tells a really interesting story, because in the CARES Act and the guidance issued by the U.S. Treasury Department, and so the United States Treasury Department is the entity that's providing guidance on how to spend these funds, and they have some interesting interpretations of things. They've loosened it up over time, but they were fairly restrictive at the start. So what you see here, and this, sorry if I'm being a little bit confusing, this is North Carolina state's appropriations out of the $4 billion. And in the U.S. Treasury guidance, it said that the Congress meant and intended that the money's coming down from the feds for those additional, in North Carolina, of the 100 counties, the 97 that didn't receive funding, 45% of that $4 billion should, and I'm going to put air quotes on should, go to local governments. What you see here in the first bill, 4%, $150 million equates to 4%. They allocated in other percentage amounts in this column to community colleges, the UNC system, the higher education system, behavioral health, Medicaid. So a litany of a list of things there that they gave the money to other than local governments. And so in a moment, you'll see we were advocating strongly that, you know, wait a second, you should be giving monies to the local governments, at least 45%. That's what the U.S. Treasury Department said they should do. We heard back from the leaders in the state of North Carolina, particularly in the Senate, that said, yeah, it didn't say shall, it said should. And we interpret that we have the ability to spend these monies the way that we think they should be spent and trickle down to local governments. By us spending on this, it will help you recover. So therein lies one of our first issues where we've got a challenge policy-wise, politically, and that we've been fighting or advocating strongly for increased dollars coming out of the CARES Act. And this is just the first tranche of money. We're still advocating for a second tranche of money in a bill coming from Congress, which is still under debate, as well as the flexibility on what those funds can be used for. This goes into a little bit more of what I said. It's just a text explaining some of the things that I have already talked about. But the main point I want to make here is that the NC Pro office, which is the North Carolina Pandemic Recovery Office, was established in the state budget office. And that's the entity, and it's likely replicated in the states that you're in. If you're not in North Carolina, there is an office been set up at the state level to figure out how to allot this money, how to allocate it, interpreting the U.S. Treasury guidance, coming up with own state guidance. And so we, the association, along with the League of Municipalities in North Carolina, have been working closely with that office, trying to understand all of the funding mechanisms and help ease the way or clear the path for better use of those funds. Here's the map I wanted to put on here so you can see which states got what. As I said, North Carolina received $4 billion out of the first CARES Act. Florida is 8.3, Georgia 4.1, et cetera. You can look around the Southeast and see those amounts and how they were allocated from Congress. Each state is doing this differently. My counterparts, the executive directors across the state, we are in contact a lot. In fact, just this morning, there is a day doesn't go by about, hey, what's going on in your state and how is your state allocating the money? Can it be used on things like broadband, hazard pay, those types of things? So it's creating a lot of conversation in the United States about how this can be used. States are facing similar types of significant budgetary restraints that local governments are. So there's big concerns, and we've already seen evidence of states sort of stepping in front of the money, as I alluded to on the 45%, looking at that money to fill the holes of state budgets. It's an estimated $4 billion deficit that they're talking about in the state of North Carolina. So it's going to continue to be this type of dialogue and continue to be significant pressure on budgets, both at the state and at the local level. This slide is in here just to illustrate the fact that I'm only talking about one line item in the CARES Act, which is the local government monies. This shows that there's also significant other types of monies that were allocated out of the $3 trillion package that will help on the peripheries or on other big issues. other than just local government. There were child care block grants, community service block grants, lots of funds pushed into the systems that are already in place, and for those disbursements can take place through already established mechanisms. But they're out there. They're other funds available. So if you can't find what you're looking for through local government, you could potentially look at other avenues. So you might want to try to find as much information on where those things are in the CARES Act. On an advocacy point, this is what I was talking about earlier. Let me get back to my slide here. So we continue to advocate with the league and the mayors in North Carolina that we absolutely have to have that flexibility on the use of the funds, especially for revenue, because right now we don't have it. And I'm going to show you what our revenue numbers are here in a second. We are advocating for the 45% that I talked about, and we've been advocating the budget leaders to go ahead and loosen up that additional pot of money, that 150. Remember, I said they put 150 outright, and then they put the other 150 in a savings account. We were advocating for them to go ahead and do that because the clock is ticking. And fortunately, we're successful on that. The General Assembly just in the past month went ahead and released those funds. And when they did so, they changed the law to require that counties share at least up to 25% of those dollars, which are split by county in North Carolina, with their municipalities. But that's all they said. They didn't give any other guidance on how to do it. So there has been another issue that we're working with that NC Pro office on how to do that. Is it a population base? Is it just an agreement with the municipalities? Is it just one of the municipalities? Is it all? It's all is the answer to that question. And so that becomes even more complex, and we're working through that right now. And one other final point on this slide I would like to just mention is there are significant strings tied to these dollars, really liable strings. And there's going to be a significant amount of auditing going on with this money by the federal government. And so if it's not spent on these types of the agreed upon guidance, you could be liable to pay it back and with penalty. And in some cases, the state in North Carolina put language in the bill that said that the commissioners would be personally liable for misuse of these funds. So people are nervous about some of that language. In North Carolina, sales tax is a big driver in our budget. It's collected at the state and then shared back out, but it's a 3-month lag. That's important in the trend data that I'm going to show you here in a second. We've been estimating about anywhere from 7 to 20% loss in sales tax in the state of North Carolina. The numbers just came out recently that April's numbers, we were 13% down in sales tax collection statewide. Big numbers, and I think they're going to get even larger. I just got a message on my phone right before we started that the city of Raleigh said they're off by 80% for their downtown businesses. So right now we collect property tax once a year officially in the state of North Carolina. We anticipate that we're going to see pressures on property tax come later, 1st of 21, because people may not be able to afford to pay the property tax. So we're going to look at that. Occupancy tax, I think, was mentioned in Georgia. That's an issue here. It's a bigger issue for cities in North Carolina than it is for counties. And then the utility revenue, they basically suspended all payments or shutting people off and charging late fees. So that just expired, and so counties and cities will lose money, revenue streams from there. And last slide for me, and then I'll be quiet, this is our trend analysis. As I said, that we're off, and if you look at the number for 20, we're down at 2017 levels right now for what we've seen. And again, we only get our data about 3 months lag time for sales tax distribution. So again, this is one you might want to look at later. But lots of good information there. But we anticipate that these numbers are going to continue to slide down and hopefully steady out, level out soon. So sorry if I went on too long. I hope that's helpful. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa now. Oh, there's my contact information. Happy to take any questions, either an email or you can give me a call at your convenience.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yep.
And Lisa?
Oh, well, my name is Lisa Schumatz. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And I'm going to be trying to help you deal with the double whammy of you were dealing with China and now you've got COVID impacts on top of it. So coping with stagnation, quality, and tight budgets. How can you recycle more effectively and cost effectively? Next slide. The topics I'm going to talk about, next slide. Topics I'm going to talk about will deal with cost effectiveness and the research we use to figure out what is cost effective. How do you get the more tons for the same money or the same tons for less money through collection strategies, through processing and market quality strategies, through outreach and education, and then we'll do a little summary at the end. Why am I here? I've got about 40 years of experience in this with multiple different hats, including as a consultant and as a city planner in solid waste. And also we've worked for the major and minor communities all across the US, including a number in the Southeast. So thank you for that. And we gather a ton of data every couple of years and do a lot of statistical analysis about that on that data. Thank you to those of you who send us that data. And we publish that information so that everyone can use it. It's transferable lessons that we make available. And when you see article in RR, I mean resource recycling. So that is a magazine that you can look for some of those results. And as my predecessor Kevin noted, on the right hand side, I have the slides are wordy because I know that after the fact you'll probably be looking at them as a resource, and a photo alone doesn't remind you of what I talked about. So next slide. So the first part I'm going to talk about is a little background. And the slide after that is data and statistics. Can we go to that, please? So we collect data on a wide variety of information from cities and counties and states from over 1,000 communities across the US, and we oversample in the 100 largest. Again, thanks to those of you who send it. And what we do is we analyze it statistically because statistics are much more powerful than case studies. Telling you the power of large data sets is that we can give you causation and transferable information, sort of holding all the other community factors constant. What does this program do? What does this program do in terms of tons? What does it do in terms of costs? And so that's why we base it on data. And we think that that's the strongest kind of lesson to give to other communities. Next slide. So what we do is we put the data we analyze that data and we put it into graphs. And these graphs, although scary, are really very powerful and meaningful. You'll see we have a whole bunch of different options you can do for collection and program design on the left. Pay-as-you-throw, single stream, frequency of collection, mandatory, education, and so on and so forth. Next slide. And the way that you figure out what is most effective and most cost effective is looking at winning features. Winning features are things where you get the same tons for a lower cost, making it more efficient, or getting more tons for the same cost, making it sort of more cost effective, and to try to get past that stagnant recycling or diversion rate, but yet not break the bank. Yes, you can get more by spending more. What can we do by spending the same or less? So what I'm looking for when I do this work is I look for a really long blue or green bar, which says we get more tons in either recycling or organics, and a short or negative red bar or gold bar, which says I do so at very low additional cost or actually less cost. So those are the sorts of things we're looking at. What did we find? Next slide. First, we found one of the most cost-effective strategies is pay as you throw. So the next slide after that says another very cost-effective thing that you can do is look at no separate fee for those additional programs like recycling and like organics. Next slide says another really cost-effective thing you can look at is optimizing material collection frequency and the materials that are being collected. And the next slide after that says another really cost-effective thing that you can do is look at bans and mandates and their role in your program's design. The next slide after that says that another effective thing you can do is look at outreach. And we need to talk a little bit about outreach because it's not a pure win. It's not as cost effective as the other options, which tend to have larger blue or green bars and short or negative red bars. You can see that education, the last two, the red bar is actually longer than the blue bar, which implies its cost per impact is higher than some of the other ones where the impact was a bigger bar than the cost. Next slide we'll talk about the most effective things on the collection side. Next slide. The single most effective thing that you can do is go to pay as you throw or save as you throw, whichever name you like, pick a name. It's a no-brainer for single family. It's the most cost-effective thing that you can do. You get more tons. You get 17 to 18% reduction in trash. A third of it goes to recycling, a third of it goes to organics, and a third of it goes to source reduction, which you don't have to pay for at all. So that's a clear win. It doubles recycling and it rewards all kinds of waste reduction behavior, not only recycling. It also pays for itself because you're paying through fees. There's no additional, it's not an additional cost, no new trucks down the street. I have information on this slide for you to look at later about what are the best practices, special considerations relating to homeowners associations and multifamily. Homeowners associations are a little tricky, but doable. Multifamily, I would say delay until after you've got it in place in your single family, then we can talk. I talk about the main ways to implement and some of the main drawbacks. The main things are that, cart financing is an issue, and there are certainly ways around that. And haulers tend not to like this program because they're not familiar with it, or they're concerned about change or revenue risk. But in fact, based on the best practices designs, they should like it because you are commanding that they provide recycling and organics at the same time in a best practices world, or at least recycling, and get paid for it and make profit on it. You're not saying they have to do that for free or not getting reimbursed. So it's an unusual situation. On each slide, I also show you the ways that it gets implemented as well. Next slide. So on this slide, I do want to let you know that pay as you throw or save you throw is not uncommon. On the right-hand side, I show graphs that have the number of towns with pay as you throw, the percent of population with pay as you throw, and what states actually have legislation regarding pay as you throw. But what's really especially important about pay as you throw is it's not only for the residential sector. Pay as you throw can be put in place for the commercial sector. And I should define pay as you throw because it's not a term that maybe everybody knows, and I always forget that. What it means is you pay more for a bigger trash can than for collecting a bigger trash can than you pay for a smaller trash can. So if you put out a big can, your bill is bigger than if you put out a small can. Or if you put out multiple bags, your bill is bigger than if you put out fewer bags. And the recycling program is not charged extra. It's embedded in the trash bill. That's the way that it works on the residential side. Well, that same lesson can be translated to the commercial side, and pay as you throw can be provided by commercial. You might say, oh, Lisa, everybody knows that you pay more for a bigger trash can. You pay more for more food collection. But the difference is, and the real trick in the commercial sector is, you have to embed the cost of recycling in that trash bill too. Recycling plus trash can't be more expensive than trash alone, or people don't use it. That's the lesson from the residential side. So what you have to do is reconstruct the trash bills that say, okay, trash haulers, your trash bill now has to also include the cost of a certain amount of recycling into that trash bill as well. Therefore, trash plus recycling isn't more expensive than trash alone. And so that's the secret there. And oh my gosh, that opens the floodgates for recycling in the commercial sector. And not a cost to the city. The cost to the city is an ordinance. So yes, it's a cost to the businesses. Yes, it's the haulers make more money, but if you're trying to get diversion and you're trying to keep the costs low for the city, this is a big bang way to do it. Next slide. One of the other things that's really important to consider is optimizing collection frequency. So 80 to 90% plus of the cost of providing the services you're currently providing are all about the stops you're making in front of people's homes. So if you can get more material from those same number of stops, you're not adding much cost and you are adding a lot of tonnage. So what it turns out is if we do the math, weekly recycling is a poor expenditure of funds. Weekly recycling gets you 1 to 3 percentage points more material at almost double the cost. Those extra tons are 5 times as expensive as the cost from the first collection, the first collection, not the second. So it's really important that you consider going to every other week recycling collection, not weekly. It is a waste of your money. Instead, if you're able to keep that second collection, use it for organics. And that will, instead of getting you 1 to 3 percentage points, that'll get you 15 to 20 percentage points. And in the old world, it used to be that that would be considerably more expensive because you were getting revenues for the recycling and paying for organics. That world is over. And now you're paying for both. And so there's some marginal difference in cost in tons, but nothing like it would have been before. And you're getting a lot more tons diverted from the landfill. So it's really important to consider looking at every other week collection of recyclables and substituting for that a collection of organics. The best of all, though, is to go to 1.5 stops or 2 stops a week that are in this pattern. If it's 2 stops a week, organics weekly, and trash and recycling alternating. Why trash and recycling alternating? I mean, because if you make the organics collection be the same frequency as the trash collection, people will continue to put their food waste in the trash. You want to pull it into the organics collection, assuming you have that kind of processing, then you need to make organics more frequent than trash. Then your perishables are still collected weekly as the health department wants, and your and the trash is just non-recyclable, non-organic stuff. So that would be a very strong system. If you're really trying to push the budget and really trying to make sure you're as cheap as possible, you could go to every other week collection of all 3 streams. But I think that the best interim system is organics weekly, trash and recycling alternating. Next slide. Another thing that you should consider is collection contracts or districting. Because if you are in an open market situation now with multiple haulers running around your city, then I'm going to say that there is going to be inefficiencies because people are going up and down the same streets. You have haulers that haven't reached economies of scale and optimization of their equipment or their administration costs. And if you really need to push the costs down, one of the strong ways to do that is to consider collection contracts. Now I get that there's a pro and con in terms of controversy in politics versus economics. I'm going to say that the economics are going to argue that fewer haulers tends to mean lower costs. Not to the exclusion of total, one person just totally dominates and they can choose anything they want. I'm not talking about monopoly, but I'm talking about you put out maybe an RFP, competitive RFP, and get down to one contractor or multiple contracts through a district or franchising system. They're all contracted arrangements. It's just whether there's one or more districts. It eliminates redundancy, lower vehicle miles traveled, therefore lower emissions from the trucks. You get a little better control. You lower costs and you get a more consistent program. There are pros and cons, controversy, economics, etc., but it's something to consider. Next slide. On the other side of the fence, we also have to consider, are there ways we can do more with processing and contamination? Oh, I missed one, bans and mandates. Really important slide. So one of the most effective things and most cost-effective things you can do is implement some bans or mandates. That means banning materials from disposal, having mandated programs, either mandated use of everybody will get the program, or at least everyone will pay for the program and make the economies of scale work for your program when it's citywide. Organics by choice, maybe it's $10 or $12 a household. Organics citywide is considerably less expensive than that and makes a lot more sense. Enforcement is critical, and you need to make sure that, to be clear, who's going to be enforcing. Is it you? Are you going to put the hauler in the role of that? What is that? And it definitely gets you past stagnant recycling. By bans and mandates, you can be affecting both the commercial and residential sector at the same time. And one of the things that's really vital is every comprehensive plan that we've done, when we do the math of how much gets diverted, when you include bans and mandates in a significant way, you get 10 to 30 times more tons diverted for the same city cost, not the same generator cost, but the same city cost. So if you're worried about getting the biggest bang for your city buck, then bans and mandates are something that should definitely be in the mix, not just education and happy incentives. It needs to be something significant like bans and mandates. There are lots of commercial examples and, of course, residential examples. You know, the ABC laws that are in place in your region of the country, great. A number of other alternatives. And what you need is an ordinance and an enforcement plan. I will note especially that one of the other things that helps get, that bans and mandates can help you get as well, is if you say that you're going to be putting in a ban in, say, 3 years, or you're going to be phasing in a ban or mandate in 3 years or 5 years, let's say for organics or for commercial and demolition, then that signals to the market that there's going to be a clear and big and guaranteed stream of tons that must go to a facility that manages this material. And the private sector can then do the bonding necessary to get a facility built. So this chicken and egg problem can be solved, but it's solved by bans and mandates that are phased in. It's not solved by negotiating and say promising and whatever. You have to get a ban or mandate in so there's a guaranteed stream so they can bond against that guaranteed stream. If you look at the Vermont legislation, which I think statewide is one of the best pieces of legislation I've seen, they do precisely that. They phase in bans and they count on the private sector to get those facilities built. It's really important in breaking that cycle of chicken and egg. Next slide. Processing and contamination is another important part of this equation of cost effectiveness and so on. Next slide. So on the processing and contamination side, you know, more isn't everything we're after. Collection isn't recycling. 20% trash in the recycling is no longer workable for us, US or China. And note, single stream is strongly preferred by households. I know MRFs that cannot get tonnage to them because they're dual stream, and none of the haulers can get their citizens to want dual stream collection. I'm not saying dual stream is dead. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying you need to realize it's not as simple. Dual stream is simpler to sort. Dual stream is not preferred by households, and dual stream is harder for businesses because they don't have the space to put multiple containers out back, and so you lose a lot of small businesses in your program. MRF technology can clean single stream if it's slow enough and it has enough processing steps. And note that technology is really improving fast on this side. Between robots and way more sophisticated optical sorting and so on, there's a great deal of promise in this. So we can either spend the money moving forward or spend the money moving backward, collecting more expensively and going to installing things that yet again allow dual sort. But we need better material in and out regardless. China brought this problem to a long-standing head. Next slide. We've been doing a lot of research on contamination strategies, particularly near-term ones. I'm going to talk about a few of the leaders on this sort of rainbow chart. You can see there are quite a few. I think there are 15 on this strategy overall. Next slide. So to help on the processing side, there are a couple things that I think out of this rainbow of things that are especially useful. One, a plastic bag ban or fee, because they not only make for contamination within the stream that's coming into a MRF, but once they're in a MRF, they jam up the MRF and make it so that the MRF is less efficient at processing as well. With even a very minimal fee on plastic bags, you get an 80% reduction in the use of plastic bags, and it's through an ordinance, and it's really quite straightforward and solves the problem on two sides. Glass is another question that comes up quite a bit. On the glass side, we want to say that you could consider splitting the baby. Don't say banning glass, but consider having multiple drop-offs conveniently located around your city and encourage the households to use that, and it reduces the glass in the bin. Bottle bills can help separate glass out and also can help get the quality containers out and treated well. And you should consider dual stream, but I talked about some of the pros and cons of that a moment ago. Next slide. The next slide talks about also changes in responsibility can help things. contracts directly between your city or your city's MRF and end users that want a particular material your community can produce well. That relates to local market development and broader market development. But the other thing I wanted to mention is city and MRF contracts are becoming more and more common. It's really being forced by MRFs and restructuring things as a service. And one of the things that's important part of that is statistical inbound and statistical outbound sorts with penalties to make sure the materials in are cleaner to a certain degree and outbound are clean to the required degree. There are a lot of pros and cons around these, and we've done a ton of research about it. But I think that's something that's not only on its way, it's well here. And that's another thing that's changing things, because inbound and outbound enforcement of quality is what it's all about. And that's what these contracts are about. Next slide. There are also some longer term strategies that I think we're not going to talk about here. EPR, more market development end uses, content standards, and my number one ding 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 as an economist strategy that sort of wins the pot for me of all is a carbon tax, which makes recycling the most desirable commodity around, far better than virgin. Next slide is education. So go to the next slide after the title, and we get to education and outreach. Education and outreach is important, but not as cost effective as the other outreach. And the main thing to know is that you have to motivate, not just inform people. Next slide. The 3 lessons we use in education are self-efficacy, or empowering people in your message so they know that they make a difference. The second thing is appeal on what they value, not what you value. Just because you think it's important that greenhouse gas is reduced does not mean that your citizens do. Do a little market research and figure out what they care about. If they care about landfills filling up, use landfills filling up. Do whatever appeals to them. It's market research 101. And third, social marketing can make a big difference. Yes, I get that social marketing and some of these other strategies can be a little bit more expensive, but maybe you do education to a quarter of your residents each year over a 4-year cycle. You can do that in a targeted way. Don't forget to count the fact that they will remember messages maybe a year or 2, so maybe you don't have to do it every year. And that means you can do this cycling, and your cost effectiveness, if let's say your education lasts 2 years, then your cost per ton has just been halved because you got tons over 2 years. So your cost effectiveness is better. There's research on hang tags and oops tags that are show they're quite effective as a method to educate. And our research recently on oops tags, so that you get quite a big extra bang if you do oops tags, say 2 weeks in a row, and really drive home that message, not once and done. And make sure you measure the impacts, because that'll tell you how to do it better the next time. Next slide. So my last slide here, go past summary to the last slide, is 1, real data matters. It tells us what we can really do, not just hypotheticals, but what is the real impact. 2, you can improve your cost effectiveness and your impact through collection strategies, through things that affect processing in markets, and through more effective education and outreach. But I would strongly recommend that you track those and adjust your decisions. And a summary of the list of what we know and what we just talked about is listed on this slide. Next slide is my contact information, and I'd be happy to hear from you if you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. We have covered a lot of information in this hour. I would like to have some time for questions, but we are now at the top of the hour, so I'm going to offer to want to remind our audience that CERTIC does have a grant program that can help you with infrastructure improvements for your recycling. Please see our website, and the information is there. That will fit into some of what we've been told. I'd like to thank our speakers today for the time they've put in to bring this together. And I know there's some questions out there, and if you will email those to me, I will get them to the speakers, and we will, particularly if you get them to us today, we will include that in the summary that we send out next week, where we will be distributing the slides and the recording of the webinar. Kevin, Lisa, Michael, and Jen, who drove this from the background and made it happen, I want to thank all of you, and everybody, I wish you a good day.